Hey, it's John Terry, the Black Belt Leader. Welcome to another Black Belt Leadership Master Your Life podcast. In this particular episode, I want to take a few minutes and talk about Black Belt mindset, developing the mindset of a Black Belt leader in life. Because as you think, you become. Shortly before the coronavirus pandemic locked down our nation, I was privileged to be invited to Dallas, Texas to speak as part of a panel discussion talking to financial sales professionals about the regulatory changes that were taking place in their world and how they were going to need to restructure and retool their sales and their marketing activities to make sure that they were in compliance with the new rules and regulations that were going to govern their industry. And while we were there, we had an opportunity for an informal breakout session where I was joined by a number of Dallas Cowboy Hall of Famers. These individuals, amazing in their own right, had an opportunity to share their own personal stories of overcoming obstacles, to overcoming defeat and challenges in their own lives, to really becoming champions in their own life and being part of championship teams. So in this interaction informally with the guys and gals that were a part of this event, we had an opportunity to really talk about the mindset of a champion and the mindset of a Black Belt leader. For these individuals that were there, some were going to have to make minor tweaks in their business. Others were going to have to make a major overhaul in the way that they operated and conducted business with the public. But all of this reminded me of a quote by the legendary professional and personal development guru, Jim Rohn. And Jim said, you can't change your destination overnight, but you can change your direction overnight. Now, for these men and women that were in the room, they were going to have to change the direction of how they sold and how they marketed so that they could comply with a new regulatory environment that were putting some additional constraints on them. But this same quote applies to each and every one of us as it comes to our thinking. You can't change where you're going overnight, but you can change your direction. I was boarding a plane for San Francisco at the conclusion of that event. And as I was thinking about that quote and the fact that from time to time we all have to make course corrections, I thought about what would happen is if we left Dallas Fort Worth Airport and we took off to San Francisco International, and the pilot was off in terms of his compass directions by just 1 degree. By the time we got to the San Francisco airport area, we would have been literally over 100 miles off course because of a single degree of offset in our flight pattern. Now, for those of us that think as Black Belt leaders, how often do we miss the mark and miss the perfect because we're 1 degree off in our thinking? I found it interesting that after the event was over, one of the gentlemen that was there, his name was Eric, offered to give me a ride to the airport. And as we were traveling, he took me to this amazing Italian restaurant. And we had an opportunity to eat some incredible food. But as we left, it was really getting to be a busy time on the roads in Dallas. And if you've ever been to Dallas, my dad described it 30, 40 years ago as the land of perpetual construction. And 30, 40 years later, he's still right. But luckily, Eric had a Waze app on his phone. And as he hooked that up in his car and he turned it on, that device would interrupt us periodically to say, turn here or turn there or alternate route so that we could miss areas of congestion. And Eric was able to get me to where I wanted to go. Why? Because of a simple course correction. I was able to get where I wanted to go in the time I wanted to get there, but it required some tweaks and some adjustments in how we traveled. The same it is with our thinking. One of the things I've told my kids their entire life, and it's a principle I live my life by, and I teach in all of the content that I share when it comes to leadership and influence and mindset, and it's this. Life is a series of choices and consequences. You and I, every day, we choose our choices. But the choices that we make all have a consequence. And the consequence of our lives happen as a result of the choices that we have made. So one of the things I challenge people as they're struggling to achieve a level of success they desire is to look at their choices and to remember this, that if you don't like the consequences of life that you're experiencing right now, The way to change that is to change your choices. One of my mentors is Wayne Nance, the founder of Real Life Management, and Wayne says it this way. He says, all of us have a destiny in mind, but if we make bad choices, we're likely to miss the mark and enjoy, and sometimes not enjoy, a very different outcome than we intended. In his book, Thinking for a Change, one of my other mentors, Dr. John C. Maxwell, or Papa John as I like to refer to him, he says two powerful statements about thinking and our mindset. Our thoughts determine our destiny. And our destiny, where we're going, ultimately determines our legacy, how we're going to be remembered. You know, in his book, As a Man Thinketh, James Allen made a very powerful statement that should really shape the understanding of developing a black belt mindset in your life. Here's what he said. He says, you are today where your thoughts have brought you, and you will be tomorrow where your thoughts take you. Now, give some thought to what James Allen just said. And if you've not had an opportunity to read that quintessential book, As a Man Thinketh, I encourage you to go to Amazon and pick up a copy of that. That book has literally shaped the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. Some of the most successful entrepreneurs and business owners have learned from James Allen the power of thinking, because as you think, you become. And your thoughts that you've used in the past have brought about the choices that you have made, because every choice begins with a thought. You are today where the sum total of your thoughts have brought you. And tomorrow you will be where your thoughts take you. Life is a series of choices and consequences, but those choices begin with a thought. So a black belt mindset aha moment is this: as you think, you become. So we really have to take an important and deep look at what we are thinking and how we are thinking and why we are thinking, and potentially reshape and reprogram our thinking if we want to truly become that black belt leader in life that lives life with black belt excellence and performs at a world-class level with everything that you and I set forth to do. Arthur William Ward said it this way. He says, nothing limits achievement like small thinking, and nothing expands possibilities like unleashed imagination. But for far too many of us, we've got stinking thinking in our head. That limited thinking, that nagging little voice that is constantly saying, you can't do this. Don't do that. That's dangerous. Don't do that. That's risky. But ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, if you do what you've always done, you're going to get the same results you've always gotten. If you want to achieve a higher level of success in any area of your life, you've got to get rid of stinking thinking. You've got to make a course correction in the way you think so that the choices you make are going to lead to a better outcome. You know, Zig Ziglar says stinking thinking is at the heart of many of our poor choices in life. You know, good thoughts may be hard to come by in the beginning if we've been taught to think limited or we've got a negative view of the world around us. If you've not trained yourself to think differently, it's hard at first. It's like exercising the muscles in our body. If you've never done push-ups and you start doing push-ups, maybe you can only do 8 or 10 or 12. But as you continue to exercise those muscles, all of a sudden 10 or 12 become 20 or 30. I remember reading a book by Pastor Mark Batterson called Win the Day. And when Mark wanted to get himself in shape, he started out doing push-ups. And he committed to do just a little bit more every day until he got to the point that he was doing 100 push-ups a day without stopping. You know, I think of Sister Madonna, who at the age of 40 was an obese nun who was being mocked and made fun of in her convent because of the fact that she was not taking good care of the temple in which her God resided. And so she decided to change her thinking about herself and to change the way she viewed herself. And because of that, the choices that she made led her to begin to change her diet and to begin to start walking. Ultimately, it was 5 blocks. And then it was a little bit more and a little bit more. Now she's over the age of 70. She's completed over 340 triathlons, over 40 Ironman triathlons, and continues to see and achieve amazing results, often finishing these triathlons ahead of people that are 20, 30, and 40 years younger than she is. But it started with changing stinking thinking. Because when you get rid of stinking thinking, you get rid of the poor choices in your life. Now, what are we really talking about at the end of the day? We're talking about learning to retool our brains. When we begin to think about our thinking and we begin to alter the way that we view the world by reshaping, reprogramming our thought process, interestingly enough, the brain begins to build new neural pathways to connect to those new thoughts. And over time, as we continue to think into those new thoughts, those neural pathways become stronger. They become more readily accessible. And all of a sudden, we begin to think in a new way. You know, I recently read about a study that was done where individuals in their late 70s and early 80s were brought into a scientific experiment where they were told that they were going to be taken back in time. And the college that was working on this particular project went to an old monastery and retrofitted it to 1959. The old black and white cathode TV, an AM radio, all of the furnishings, all of the books, the newspapers, everything there was 1959. The individuals that were invited in to be a part of this experiment were asked to write an autobiography about themselves in the year 1959. All of the mirrors were taken out of the monastery so nobody could see their age, and everybody was limited to only talking in the present tense as if they were in 1959. It was truly an understanding of looking at as you think, you become. So many of these individuals could barely walk in the door of the monastery because of the crippling impact of arthritis and age on their bodies. But as they walked in the door, they were greeted to Perry Como on the radio, Ed Sullivan on the television. And as they began to go back in their minds and relive 1959, when many of these individuals were decades younger, something began to happen. Their thinking began to improve. Their cognitive ability began to improve. Their hearing and their vision began to improve. Their arthritis began to subside. And many of the individuals that showed up at the end of 1 week, those that could barely walk in the door, were outside of the monastery playing touch football in the front yard. In 1 week, by changing how they thought, and their view of themselves in their mind, their bodies began to respond, and they began to experience a different outcome. Interestingly enough, a group of independent observers were brought in, and they were shown before and after pictures of these late 70 and early to mid 80 participants in this experiment, and they were asked to pick which was the younger picture of the two. The independent panel picked overwhelmingly the picture of the individuals in the after photo, stating that on average, they believed that those after pictures were taken an average of 2 to 3 years before the before picture was taken. The power of the mind and our thinking to reshape our destiny is so incredibly powerful that as we think, we become. So here's a black belt thought as well. When you learn to value good thoughts, it makes all of your thinking more valuable. So as we begin to reprogram our thinking and we begin to allow our neuroplasticity in our brain to go to these new memories that we are experiencing and living them out over and over again, something incredible happens. One of the unique things we know about the human mind is the human mind can't distinguish between what we are experiencing in the real physical world around us and what we are experiencing in our mind. Our thoughts are viewed the same, whether we're experiencing it in a physical moment in time or simply as a thought. And so as we change our thinking to really focus on good thinking, positive thinking, forward-moving thinking, all of a sudden our mind begins to open to the limitless possibilities that have always been before us. But we've yet to this point either been able to see or believe that it was possible. Remember, as you think, you become. And if you're going to pursue black belt excellence as a leader in life, it's important to understand that greatness will never be achieved by the average. The average people simply live status quo lives. I love the statement from Carly Fiorina in her book, Find Your Way, where she says, the status quo has great power, but leaders challenge the status quo to change things for the better. How do we challenge the status quo? It starts with our thinking. Ralph Waldo Emerson said it best. He says, life consists of what a man or a woman is thinking about all day long. Why? Because as we think, we become. So that leads me to a question. What are you thinking in your mind? Where do your thoughts go every day? And are you being intentional in your thinking so that you can direct your thoughts to bring about the positive choices in your life that are going to bring about positive change and an opportunity to experience a different level of success than you're living right now? As you go through the 24 hours in the day, the 365 days of the year, how are you spending your time thinking? It is so important that we begin to think for a change. Now, there's two ways to live life. We can live life on purpose for a purpose, or we can live life by default with no purpose in mind. Sadly, 95% of the people around the world are living life by default with no purpose, no real aspirations to achieve something of significance. However, if you want to live life on purpose for a purpose, it requires intentional thinking. Living life by default requires no thinking whatsoever. So remember, life is a series of choices and consequences. You get to choose your choices, and the consequences of your life happen as a result of those choices. So if you don't like the consequences of your life, you have to change your choices. Now, how do we do that? Remember the words of James Allen. You are today where your thoughts have brought you, and you will be tomorrow where your thoughts take you. As you think, you become. Hey, I'm John Terry, the Black Belt Leader, and I want to thank you for joining me for this Black Belt Leadership Master Your Life podcast. If you haven't had a chance to connect with me online, visit me at beablackbeltleader.com and go to our Contact Us page. You'll find all of our social media links and the opportunity there to subscribe to our newsletter. I encourage you to follow us online because every day we're sharing tips, tools, and resources to help you up-level your personal growth and development as well as that of your team. So let me say thank you for joining me for this Black Belt Leadership Master Your Life podcast. Go change your thinking. Go change your world, because as you think, you become.